And we're off. Welcome to the Axiom of the Infinite Unknown, episode 12. Today we're going to talk about utopias. We were chatting about this because it seems like a very, very relevant topic, the idea of utopias, because throughout for hundreds of years, like I'm going to read you a definition that comes from a book from 1516 where the word originated. But this idea of an ideal world is something that, like, it's something that as old as human storytelling is, maybe.
As the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, it's a good point with Garden of Eden, yeah. So, but it seems like a very relevant topic, and a large driver of this, just so you know, with all this culture war stuff, there's massively different viewpoints on what an ideal world is, and in terms of economically, in terms of politically, religious-wise, nationalistic stuff, ethnic stuff, religious supremacy stuff, all sorts of viewpoints. So we decided we're going to give it a bash at talking about what way we even think about the concept of an ideal world, because it obviously would be handy to have an orientation toward something to aim for as a society. But at the same time, what we use as a North Star to guide ourselves could potentially lead us off the abyss if we're not careful, because we could end up using a map that very badly describes the territory. So before I hand it over to James to kick off with his thoughts, after my ridiculous introduction, I'm going to define utopia using a wonderful crowdsourced definition from Wikipedia. It goes like this. A utopia is an imagined community or society that possesses highly desirable or nearly perfect qualities for its citizens. The term was coined by Sir Thomas More for his 1516 book, Utopia, describing a fictional island society in the South Atlantic Ocean off the coast of South America. The opposite of a utopia is a dystopia, which dominates the fictional literature. A utopia focuses on equality in such categories as economics, government, and justice, with the method and structure of proposed implementation varying based on ideology. Lyman Tower Sargent argues that utopia's nature is inherently contradictory because societies are not homogeneous and have desires which conflict and therefore cannot simultaneously be satisfied. According to Sargent, there are socialist, capitalist, monarchical, democratic, anarchist, ecological, feminist, patriarchal, egalitarian, hierarchical, racist, left-wing, right-wing, reformist, free love, nuclear family, extended family, gay, lesbian, and many more utopias. Utopianism, some argue, is essential for the improvement of the human condition, but if used wrongly, it becomes dangerous. Utopia has an inherent contradictory nature here. So, with that, what's the story, James, with utopias?
Yeah, dude. In all seriousness, I wasn't expecting your definition of utopia to so thoroughly dismantle itself. It does a good job at destroying its own argument. Obviously, from what you read out, one of the problems with a utopia is that it's practically impossible. You can't manifest a utopia. It's a world in which everybody's happy because they've got what they want. But okay, use any example. If I wanted to live on a seafront and many other people also wanted to live on the seafront, there's only so much seafront. So some people aren't going to get to live on the seafront. So what do we do about that? Like, practically, we can't make everyone happy. If people want their town to be smaller and other people want their town to be bigger, well, then somebody's going to be unhappy. And so it's not, so that's if you sort of actually think we want to make everyone happy. But of course, most utopians don't. They want to make the people they care about happy. So, okay, fine, we'll go with the realistic utopia, and we'll try to figure out, okay, what can you do to make people better off in the way that I care about. And it ties into it a belief that there's enough that already exists such that it's simply a symptom of the fact that there's an unfair distribution, that people aren't already all happy. And so what we need is redistribution. And then even a society without monetary incentives will still somehow be okay. We'll ignore that. We'll ignore the whole fact that economics absolutely crumbles if you sort of have this approach. Well, okay, so you've told me I have to be one type of a thing. What's an example of a job that needs to be done, even in a utopia? I suppose somebody has to distribute the food. So what if I don't want to be the guy who distributes the food? Well, then do I get to sort of reject my handed job? If not, then there seems to be no means by which I can be happy in this society, and so there's no error correction. And how then? First of all, why did I get assigned this job? Was it a human being that assigned it to me, or maybe now we could probably have a really super artificial intelligence who knows exactly who should do what? And it's a machine learning model. Well, on what data is the model trained? And how do we feed more data into it if the data it gets after the fact it's made the decisions is only ever going to be confirmatory of the decisions it made? There's no error correction there. So it falls apart. It falls apart in every dimension you could possibly approach a utopia. It never quite pulls off any of its promises, and I don't even know what would exist in a utopia. Would oil exist in a utopia? If not, then what happens to all the hydrocarbons and the medicines that rely on it and the medical tools that rely on it? And how many people have to die for the utopia to be brought about? Like, I know it's a near infinite good, and so nearly infinite destruction can be justified to get to an infinite good. Is that like millions of people that need to die? Billions of people? Anybody who stands in the way of it obviously needs to die because they're standing in the way of infinite good. So they're infinitely evil. It's so problematic on every conceivable measure. And I don't think anybody who has this idealized version of a world in their head has taken 1 second, or actually they could have taken a second, but a decent amount of time, like even just a few hours of really contemplating all of the things that would need to work out for it to be brought about. And who gets to choose what the right views of a utopia are? You read out a load of examples I wasn't expecting. They were like, what was it, feminism and socialism and capitalism and
free love and nuclear family and loads of anything that contradicts it.
Yeah, so which one of those gets to be the one? Like,
I think a major, if you were to think about it, almost philosophically, I suppose, but not in a kind of a navel-gazing sense, in a practical sense, a common thread amongst utopian ideals is the assumption that they know for sure what the way to live is, based on like this arrogance around this assumption that we know what perfection is.
Exactly.
And that's like a thread. And another component, there's the arrogance to assume that we know what perfection is. And then there's also the ignorance in a bad way, because we often talk about ignorance being a good thing in terms of accepting it and realizing that you're only ever navigating ignorance.
Yeah,
but
it's not bad. It's just you have to accept it. It's
it's
not like we love it.
Yeah. You have to be aware of your own ignorance.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that a lot of utopianist ideals is based around blank slates, or what I kind of think of as blank slate social constructionism, where if we build the society, then the human nature will fit it, or the human behaviors will just slot into place based on the structures that we build. You know, like if we have certain work situations, like an obvious example would be this idea of dismantling capitalism and establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat, and this idea of everyone can do their own thing and have all this freedom. You know, the kind of Marxist idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat and communism being this intermediary step on the way to utopia. This kind of idea of assuming that, oh, if we just do this, then everything will be fine. You know, or it's the same idea of, it's no different to the arrogance behind trying to establish an Islamic caliphate, or Jewish or the Nazi eradication of the Jews and like purifying, to use their language, of the species of humanity. It's no different. It's this assumption that we know what the way to live is, and we're going to establish the perfect world for our tribe. Usually, like you mentioned, it's like all these, and then in the list is all these different things. So I think it's those two, like the arrogance of assuming we know what perfection is, and then the unacceptable ignorance of not realizing that there is a reality to human nature, and that of course there is structures that can more or less allow for the emergence of human nature in a productive way. But how are we to know that we're going to design one that will? So that's the ignorance component
the one intolerable ignorance is epistemic arrogance. That's the
that probably covers both.
Achilles heel.
That epistemic arrogance really kind of covers both, I suppose. There's epistemic arrogance, because there's epistemic arrogance around the idea of
not being aware of your ignorance.
And thinking that someone knows enough about human nature to know precisely what societal design would facilitate or would best suit human nature.
And what people actually want, like people think they want to enjoy the products of many different industries that have created entertainment, like Netflix and video games and football and rugby. People think they want that, but they're wrong, because what they actually want is this idea of the world that I've designed in my head. It's, you know, it's just it's incredible when you play it out. And it really does come back. Go on.
No. Go on there. You were finishing.
No, I was going to say it really does come back to that epistemic arrogance that you're not even willing to concede that your ideal might be wrong, and it's not even that. It doesn't even quite fit in. It's like a category error. It doesn't even fit into a falsifiable space. It's not even a claim so much as an assertion. It's
that's why you see it across so many different ideologies, because it doesn't even really matter what the ideology is. There's that brilliant phrase, I've used it a lot, by that writer Anais Nin. She said, "We do not see the world as it is, we see the world as we are." Where there's this viewpoint from inside where it's really hard. Another way of thinking of it is that it's very difficult. It's very hard to read the label when you're inside of the jar. You know, and that so it's like we each have our own perspectives, and that especially if we have a particular ideology that we buy into as the way to view the world in terms of religion or political viewpoint or political temperament, in terms of leaning more towards progressivism or conservatism or whatever, you know, or particular religions, like for any one of those utopias that I listed earlier on in that Wikipedia definition, for any one of them to be right, all the rest of them need to be wrong. Which means that, think about the arrogance of that, you know, to think that we know the way. This is the way. This is the way for sure that it is structured, you know. But
it's why is that we're sort of agreed that given the importance of epistemic humility, that we rather enjoy Nassim Taleb's personal utopia, and it's not just a palatable utopia. It's to what the term should refer. Utopia should refer to a practical scenario with a bit of implausible hopes, which is to say that epistemocrats would be, and we'll explain all of this, but epistemocrats would actually be elected. So it's a little bit implausible in that regard. But it allows for an understanding of the world as it actually is and what can be best achieved within the real system that we have.
Yeah, he describes, do you want to read the definition there? You have it. Do you have it? I have it here as well if you want me to.
Yeah, no, go for it, dude. So we're talking about, just to have it on the table, we're talking about Nassim Taleb's Epistemocracy, and that is his idea of a utopia. So you can go ahead.
So it's from this book, The Black Swan, one of the most impactful books I've ever read. Like one of these.
A Quake book.
Quake book, yeah.
So that's his version. I've got the Incerto version here.
And it's what I really like about. So anyway, I'll read this first, and then we can chat about it. So he says,
go for it, dude.
This is chapter 12, Epistemocracy. Everyone has an idea of utopia. For me, it means equality, universal justice, freedom from oppression, freedom from work. To me, utopia is an epistemocracy, a society in which anyone of rank is an epistemocrat, and where epistemocrats manage to be elected. It would be a society governed from the basis of the awareness of ignorance, not knowledge. Yeah.
So that's the important part. There's so much going on there, because
so much.
It really does encapsulate what we both feel to be probably it's the crucial step to sense making that precedes all other progress we're going to make on an ability to actually navigate the world as it is. It's an understanding that we are only ever best dealing with our ignorance, as opposed to using all of our knowledge to figure things out. It's like the knowledge is basically the symptom of having better understood the areas in which we're less ignorant, and it's almost the outcome. So it's a flipping of how we usually think about things, which is like, we know that eating carbs is bad for you. Just an absurd claim that you still read in all of these health magazines, and it's just still taken for granted, rather than an understanding that, okay, well, we don't know anything in that domain, but what we can say is we're less ignorant about these things. So we feel as though we can make better claims to saying it's not a bad idea to eat carbs. And like that's a flip reverse of the way people usually want to treat things. So it's important, because he actually touches on the asymmetry in the book. The Black Swan asymmetry allows you to be confident about what is wrong not about what you believe is right. And so
the growth of knowledge via negativa.
Yeah, exactly, via negativa. You can falsify something with far more certainty than you can prove something.
Yeah.
Because if you were to try to prove that every swan is white, you're going to have to find every single swan in the world. Whereas if you want to falsify it, you find a single black swan and then you're done. So, yeah.
And I think that it may seem strange to people who've never come across this concept. Like, for us to take the absolute piss out of the idea of utopia for probably, about 15 minutes anyway, and then to say, oh, this is what we think utopia is, a handy way of thinking about it. But I suppose what makes that description of the epistemocracy a useful way of thinking about utopia, from my perspective, is that it's almost an anti-utopia. But it's like a utopian anti-utopia, in that something like that, because it's basically a way of saying we don't have a clue what's going on. None of us do. Every single human being is a finite, limited, fallible, irrational, baldy primate that's just a temporarily assembled cluster of borrowed that's happened to reach a sufficient level of organic complexity, sufficient to facilitate some kind of emergence of an awareness to allow it to be aware of the fact that it is such. You know, like, every human is that, and every human is ignorant, infinitely ignorant, and will die.
Yourself, right?
What? Yeah. So basically, it's basically the epistemocracy is essentially grounded in this idea that all humans are ever doing is navigating ignorance, and we don't have a clue what's going on. And what we want to do is, we don't want to figure out the best way of doing things. We want to get better at finding out where we're fucking up. So it's like, it's not about how do we figure out the best way of doing things. It's about how do we figure out the best way of finding out how we fucked up. You know? And then so it's like it's a way of viewing the ideal world, the utopian worldview, but grounded in the concept, like you used the phrase earlier on, of error correction. It's a way of viewing reality based not on designing the perfect world, but on figuring out how to correct errors more efficiently. And then the reason we might even think about correcting errors is because we're aware of our own ignorance, because we aim to have epistemic humility. And then the reason we have epistemic humility is because of the axiom of the infinite unknown, where that's what describes that epistemic relationship between a single human and all possible knowledge in the universe or outside of the universe that has ever or could ever exist. So because all we're ever doing is generating ideas with incomplete knowledge, then we can't be certain about anything except uncertainty. So then we have epistemic humility. So then we realize all we're ever trying to do is correct errors, because we are finite, limited, irrational, baldy primates. And then what it becomes important to us is, how do we correct errors when we inevitably make mistakes, not how do we design the perfect world. And in that description of the epistemocracy, a really important point in it is that he said epistemocrats managed to be elected. So what that suggests is that there's enough people within a society that are comfortable with their ignorance, and comfortable with the idea of ignorance, and comfortable with the idea of uncertainty, and the navigation of uncertainty is all we're ever doing. That they're willing to put votes behind politicians, politicians, basically, or leadership figures that are comfortable to also say, I don't know. And they're comfortable to also say, to not speak in ways that represent a charismatic leader, which is precisely a lot of the time the antithesis of the way people behave when they're afraid, or when they're in times of uncertainty or fear. There's a tendency that humans seem to have, in terms of historically, to gravitate towards charismatic leaders and people that speak in terms of black and white rather than speak in shades of grey.
Yeah.
Which is a really scary reality.
Yeah. And this is the thing. This is where we have to accept that that's the way in which it is truly a utopia, because it butts up against how we know human evolved instinct to have manifested itself thus far. We have our brains have developed such that we prefer the person who sounds confident, even if it's completely unwarranted.
Yeah.
They don't have a justification for why they sound so certain, but it's reassuring just to hear the certainty.
Yeah.
And
The assertive idiot.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it actually, exactly that, the assertive idiot. I wonder how much of it could be ameliorated by a reprioritization within the education of children from facts and statistics to epistemological uncertainty. And because there may well be something, we may be able to get a footing in changing the way we feel about this, if we can get there and start to instill this in people. Within, we have kids for 8 hours a day. We might as well do something useful with their attention. And if we can sort of really drill this in to some degree, that one of the most important things going through life is going to be navigating your ignorance and all of this vast information just coming at you, way too much to process, then maybe we can get a foothold in the process such that when it comes to electing somebody, that does appear more attractive to more people. And we might have enough traction there.
It's prioritizing, and I'm fucking biased because I coined the term, but I genuinely think awareness and understanding of the axiom of the infinite unknown is the most important step most important concept to understand in education, full stop. Because once you're coming from a place of realizing that all knowledge is transient truth, because all I'm ever doing is generating opinions with incomplete knowledge, and then it's like that. From there, it's like uncertainty is the only certainty. Right, step one. But bedrock laid, bedrock found. Now here we are. This is it. Foundations. There we go. Because after that, then it just facilitates this. It helps to decrease the likelihood of any kind of ideological capture. Where there's ideological capture or tribalistic capture, because you're straight away like, and then the next thing. So like, what's the only thing that's certain for sure is that uncertainty is the only reasonable opinion. And then the next most certain thing that's almost certain but not quite is that death comes for us all. So it's like after that, and then after that, so then it's like those two things I think are the ignorance and death are the two things that unite all of us, and it's really important that they're grappled with often. And
it's obvious that you've been reading the Worm at the Core.
But I have memento mori, means remember you must die. I'm about this for a long time. I'm fascinated. But the Worm at the Core was just a shitload of confirmation bias. I think those two things are that to me is like an idea, and a thing with Utopia is like so Utopia to me is that epistemocracy concept as a foundation. And then one thing that my bias would lean me towards at the moment is if it, as like a thing to ponder within an epistemocracy, is what are ways of navigating mortality most usefully. So then that would be like first on the agenda, epistemocracy. Day one, we're able to genetically re-engineer Michel de Montaigne, Taleb, and build AI fucking machinery and pump all Montaigne's notes into it and generate whatever. But day one on just basically in the book, Taleb describes Montaigne as the archetypal epistemocrat. But that would be like a useful thing on the agenda initially, is the discussing mortality for people. But yeah, I think we kind of, I don't really have much else to say other than
I hope you have a quote, because that's how we need
ignorance
to end this.
navigation is the way to go. Oh, a quote.
Man.
So the quote I have for today is from Sir Karl Popper, who was mentioned in the Epistemocracy chapter with Taleb, and is what many people might know as kind of the father of the modern scientific method. I absolutely love this. I wanted to get the wording right though, so I looked it up, even though it's a short one. He says, quote, "While differing widely in the various little bits we know, in our infinite ignorance, we are all equal."
Brilliant. Perfect.
As eyes burn down, Detroit versus lately it seems as if it's me against the world.